Hello everyone, welcome back to OCD Recovery's YouTube channel. Before I go any further, please subscribe, hit that like button on this video. This is a topic that we're going to be bringing a lot of awareness to because everything I'm going to talk about today are major contributors to what's holding people back from actually getting better. Partly because it's called the doubting disorder, partly because there's a lot of poor information out there. So I really want to hammer home the importance of covering these 5 misinterpretations about OCD recovery. Let me know what you think about in the comments. As you see, I go through, like I say in every video, I answer a lot of questions. Let me know if you've heard some of these before. Let me know if you think there's other misconceptions that maybe we didn't cover in the video. But bringing awareness to these misconceptions is really important. I'm going to take my gum out real quick. Okay. The first one is very important. And I get a lot of questions talking about what is Stoicism, how does Stoicism relate to REBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, and is Stoicism going to hinder, if I become more stoic, is it going to hinder my progress? So the myth or misinterpretation about OCD recovery, number 1, is Stoicism makes you numb. Now, the reason why this is a problem is because Stoicism, even by people who have great Stoic channels, I don't actually think quite understand what Stoicism really means. And I know that might seem a little bit arrogant, but when I hear people talk about Stoicism, it's usually a surface level, and it's not a deep level of acceptance that, say, Marcus Aurelius or Seneca the Younger had, or Epictetus. I mean, the story of Epictetus, whether it's true or not, is just a great testament of what you should look it up about when he breaks his leg because he was a slave, and how he just, he's like, hey, I told you were going to break my leg. And his slave owner was so moved by his demeanor and calm and rational outlook, even though he just broke his leg, that he freed him and he became one of the greatest Stoic philosophers ever. So OCD sufferers are very, very afraid of becoming numb. They think that by becoming numb, so they'll go down the route, they'll start using REBT or cognitive behavioral therapy and start looking at life in a rational sense. And then maybe they read something and they talk about why Stoicism is dangerous. They might read, I've read stuff by very famous authors saying that Stoicism is not something to look after. And there's a couple ways to go after this. So REBT/CBT are founded off Stoicism. The fact that these philosophies and theories, which are now concrete evidence in the empirical data for cognitive behavioral therapy, we know that people who have much more rational beliefs on life have much higher rates of chronic anxiety and chronic depression, MDD, major depressive disorder. This is substantiated in the evidence. Albert Ellis talks about this all the time. So the fact that these testaments and these theories, Marcus Aurelius' meditations, have lasted thousands of years proves their significance in some way or another, whether you agree to it or not. It's the same thing like religion. The Bible, whether you agree or not, I don't follow any sort of religion, but it would be naive for me to say that the Bible itself or the Quran, New and Old Testament, are not great works of art and great works of literature, since they've lasted for thousands of years. That doesn't mean you have to agree with it or not. Agreement doesn't mean acceptance. That's why we talk about this all the time. But Stoicism does not mean that you become numb. When we look at many athletes or many entrepreneurs and CEOs that practice parts of Stoicism in their life, you see that there's major anecdotal evidence to its application. And when I say application, I mean changing your theory over time and changing your philosophical outlet over an extended period of time, because that's what's really, really important. It's not something you could snap into. So a lot of people will start doing this. Maybe they read some books on the reading list. Maybe they read some Stoicism books. And, they think that Stoicism is simply as, and remember what I said in the beginning, this big Stoic people that talk online. I've heard someone say that Stoicism means it's not what happens to you in life, it's only how you respond. That's a very, very simplified version of Stoicism, and that's not really what Stoicism means in its entirety. There's much more to Stoicism, breaking into unconditional acceptance of the self, other, and life. That can be talked about in large talks. So saying that Stoicism is It's not about what happens to you, it's about how you respond is true, but it's a very surface level, wishy-washy. It's almost like if I made a post that said, thoughts are thoughts, leave thoughts there. It's not an actual good representation of Stoicism. If you know anyone who watches Stoicism, please show them this video. Let me know if they agree with me or disagree with me. Anyone that knows me knows I'm at a point in my life where I can have any conversation, whether I agree or not, and I'm open to having an open dialect and saying why I believe this way and stuff like that. Then that's a huge part of OCD recovery. And it's why so many people get held back. So many people get held back because there's so many black and white people, there's black and white statements in OCD that just really are not beneficial for us. When I am talking to someone and I'm saying, no matter what you are looking at, always look at it and think, do I think this makes rational sense? Do I think this doesn't make sense? And actually think about it for a little bit, because OCD sufferers like to make black and white automatic just changes in their life. And Stoicism, Epicureanism, any of the Greco-Roman philosophies, pessimism, these type of things take time to understand, and whether you agree with them or not. So number 2 is a very, very important one. Acceptance doesn't work for murderers or other severe harm types of OCDs. Many people think that there are these extra categories, such as murder. We're going to use murder in this example, where people cannot actually make progress because of the severity of the immorals and value of the act. Now, before I go any further, I highly suggest watching Kirsty's video on acceptance versus agreement. If you've watched that video, let me know if you like it. There's definitely going to be more videos like that. So, no matter the act, whether we agree or not agree with the act, it cannot entirely define someone as entirely good or bad. And it's not rational or evidence-based by any means. So Hitler's always the example I use. Hitler murdered millions of people. His ideas murdered millions of people, while other people in the SS and Nazi regime helped actually act out a lot of these things. There was millions of people that agreed with Hitler. So because, let's say you lost someone in one of the camps, you highly despise Hitler and you say he's a terrible person. We're not taking away the situation of what happened to you. I'm not sympathizing with you. I agree with you. The acts were horrendous acts. But that was a trait of Hitler's. Listen to what I'm saying here, because many people thought he was a god. So 2 different people, 2 different views, 2 completely different outcomes. One person lost family members. One person got everything. Maybe they got rich in political type of schemes or some sort of Ponzi scheme or whatever it was. You know, the views themselves are dictating what the belief of the person, your beliefs are dictating whether you think that person is good or bad in their entirety. So we like at OCD Recovery to move completely away from good and bad people and only have people who have good and bad acts. Now, there are people out there who have a lot more bad, traits, we would say, than good traits, and they don't really produce a lot for society. They take a lot. But to say that that person is entirely evil or entirely bad is not true, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we can accept murderers. So let's say a lot of people are very, very scared of hurting their children. Well, why are they scared of hurting their children? It's multifactorial. Well, one, there's a societal belief that they're afraid of rejection. What happens if I hurt my kids and everyone thinks I'm crazy? So working on the fear of rejection, working on that you can feel uncomfortable. You could feel the unknown of what if they think this about me, while still moving forward in your life. And that's super important to talk about, because you don't have to agree with the act, no matter the act. So there is no such thing as acceptance doesn't work for X examples, like the really immoral ones that people think of. Unconditional acceptance works for all things. It might take you a little bit longer. It's not easy to see this through. It takes time. One of the best things I ever heard recently in Jade's new video talking about her pieces of advice for OCD recovery. Her first piece of advice was OCD recovery will take much longer than you want it to. That can't be overlooked. That has to be unconditional life acceptance. So number 3, exposures are all you need. Out of everything on here, this is the biggest misconception. Many people have conversations with me, whether it's in the IGT Lives, it's on the YouTube channel, it's on the Instagram, and I'm always willing to have this conversation. Exposures are definitely important, and all they are facing your fears. You could face your fears without having to work with anyone. It's, if you figure out what you're scared of and facing those fears. But for many OCD sufferers and chronic OCD sufferers, when the fear of fear, so the fear of being stuck forever, is also another driving factor. It's another part of the engine, and the OCD and chronic anxiety cycle is not addressed, most people won't see the relief they want to see. I'm not going to use numbers or arbitrary examples in this one. I'm just going to flat out say that even though exposures is part of the gold standard, everyone talks about ERP, exposure response prevention. So exposing yourself, responding, preventing the response that you would normally do, the compulsive behaviors, whether that's avoidance or mental checking and stuff like that. So exposures are necessary, but there's a lot of them where they're actually not necessary at all. Direct outward exposure. So like solipsism, existential, weird sensory motor, some of these other weird ones, you actually don't need exposures. And I made a post about this on my Instagram, a guy who hikes. So if you see a guy who hikes, that's my personal OCD recovery Instagram page. But I said that you have a better chance of reaching recovery in a more peaceful state, you could say, by working on unconditional self-acceptance and never doing exposures. And I'm just using this as a broad example, not to have any severe validity in it. But instead of just doing exposures and never working on your core belief, you'll probably make more progress, in my opinion, on the first one. Exposures are necessary for many people. Harm OCD, the typical ones that the average person usually knows, or average person helping others. So harm OCD, contamination OCD, POCD, some of these other ones that have outward compulsive behaviors. But a lot of people don't understand the internal thermometer, and they don't understand fear of fear. And that's really what keeps people stuck. Number 4 is something that I was sharing a cigar with a couple friends last night. And I was talking about how we have diluted in society. We now have multiple subjective meanings. And what happens is what we know when we move away from language having substantial objective meanings and we move completely to only subjective. So objective means it's an objective reality. A tree is growing. Subjective reality is what you think. Like, that's not a tree, that's a lamp. It's a totally random example, but to give you an example. The further you move away from objective reality, the more you're setting yourself up for psychological problems in the future, especially with OCD, chronic anxiety recovery, and let alone not having a disorder. So OCD recovery has one meaning. It's the absence of chronic anxiety. Intrusive thoughts lose their intrusiveness. No chronic shame and no chronic guilt, because chronic shame and guilt are products or byproducts of beliefs. They're symptoms of beliefs. Yes, there is a disorder present, but the belief is driving that. There's no really extreme emotions that last for a while. And I'm going to talk about the next one about anger and stuff like that, point number 5. But you'll still have emotions, all ranges of emotions, but they won't be in the chronic format when I talk about chronic anger here soon, because a lot of people spend a lot of their day angry and it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's a huge problem for people. So OCD recovery can mean one thing. I see a lot of things where people are saying, this is what OCD recovery means to me. If you have chronic anxiety, chronic shame, or guilt, you're not recovered. If your intrusive thoughts, sensations, or images are causing you to have chronic anxiety, you're not recovered. If you're coasting, you're not recovered. A lot of people say, well, I was fine for a year, then I relapsed. Then I was fine for 6 months, and I relapsed. It's because you were never actually really recovered. I get a lot of kickback. We get a lot of kickback on this because people say to me, no. Oh, I'm recovered because this is what it means to me. That's like saying this. I'm sober because I don't drink alcohol, but I still smoke 20 joints a day. You're not sober, you just don't drink. So that's like saying, I'm not recovered from OCD or chronic anxiety, but I've made great progress. Something to be proud of. I'm proud of that. I'm not, you don't want to measure the recovery process, but OCD recovery, because of these subjective meanings that different people are giving, it's actually hindering our progress. Because people are going, well, I'm good. This is what it means to me. I'm chronically anxious. I have chronic guilt, but I can still do what I want to do. A great part of the recovery process, a process that I'm in, but still not recovered. It's just not. So number 5 is anger and anxiety in the chronic level are necessary. I was talking to someone the other day that said, there's nothing wrong with being chronically anxious. I mean, that's what you think, then sure. But it's not necessary, and it doesn't mean recovery. Recovery means the absence of chronic anxiety. So anger, Dr. Albert Ellis spoke about anger a lot. One of my favorite books by his, which I had to read a lot and meant a lot by me, anger is a natural human emotion. Absolutely. So is being vengeful, but it almost gets you nowhere. I go to death row or a gang member who's in jail for a triple homicide. Sure, he was very vengeful, but it didn't get him anywhere. This is super important to talk about. So anger, whilst it is natural, is not a necessary in the chronic way. People getting angry on the car, angry at other people for making OCD jokes, angry at people because they disagree. And you could tell how irrational someone is by how they're presenting this to you. Get yelled at all the time, whether it's at OCD or conversations with friends, and it doesn't really faze me anymore because I understand that they're allowed to have their opinion. I don't need to agree with them, and they don't need to agree with me. They don't need to respect me. I would prefer if we saw eye to eye at the end. I've had plenty of conversations where we don't see eye to eye at the end, and it still was a great conversation, like a terrific conversation. And we agreed on like 1%. You know what I mean? So it's not as simple as anger is natural, so it's okay to be angry. And people just don't want to let go of anger because it feels powerful, right? It feels powerful to be angry. It's false. It's a false sense of power. It's a conditional sense of power in a way, but it's not necessary. That doesn't mean you're never going to feel some sort of anxiety again. It never means you're never going to feel a burst of anger here and there. But when you look at things in a more rational manner, you understand that it's not a necessary thing to be feeling. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Knew it was going to be a little bit longer of a video. Misinterpretations of OCD recovery are huge. Stoicism is a big one. If Stoicism, Rob wanted me to say this, I totally forgot until now. If Stoicism made you numb, you wouldn't see me joking around in the WhatsApp groups, on the Facebook group. You wouldn't see me and Rob and I joking around, making fun of each other. It doesn't mean what most people say it means. It's just a misunderstanding. A lot of people are on the right track, but they haven't fully kind of grasped its true meaning, which is completely okay. I don't have a full grasp of acceptance, but I'm on my way. So don't forget to subscribe, like that video. Let me know about these misinterpretations. Again, let me know if you disagree, whether you agree. I will answer every single comment, no matter what. So thank you again, and have a great day. Turn it off. Come on.